Clarence Thomas doesn't want to die on that court, and he's getting old, and he's never going to retire during a Democratic president. So Clarence Thomas, one of the reasons why he's not recusing himself is that Clarence Thomas needs Trump to win again so Clarence Thomas can retire. And most likely, Sam Alito needs Trump to win again so Alito can retire instead of having to die on the bench. And so that's at least 2 of the 9 who have a vested professional interest in seeing continued Republican hegemony over this country. And that's not the first time this has happened. As we all know, Sandra Day O'Connor wanted George Bush to be president and thus appointed him president in Bush v. Gore because she wanted to retire under a Republican president. This is how Republicans roll.
Does anyone doubt that that is a major consideration on the part of someone like Clarence Thomas? Similarly to, we don't know as much about the way he thinks, but Clarence Thomas is one of the most thoroughly corrupt public figures in the last century in American politics. So does anyone doubt that that's a strong consideration? By the way, I would remind Clarence Thomas, you don't need Trump to win to be able to retire. You can just forget this whole thing. John Oliver is waiting in the wings to offer you $1 million a year and a motor coach. You can just take it. Although, as many people have pointed out on threads, it looks like someone outbid John Oliver. We were hypothesizing that someone might, and it looks like it probably happened because they would not do this if that was not a consideration. Elie Mystal is 100% right.
Before we continue with the story, we depend on members to keep on going. Don't wait. Click join now on YouTube.
And again, I will take this opportunity to remind you, it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to have Republicans on the Supreme Court desperately clinging to office so that someone on their party can put, their replacement in power. And by the way, in 4 or 8 years, I don't know that necessarily Sotomayor or Kagan or whatever would do this. I mean, it's hard. There's so few Democrats on the court, but theoretically they could do the same thing. It doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to appoint people to the Supreme Court in the way that we do. If we did it under one of the reform situations that we've broken down on the show before, where theoretically during you get an 18-year term rather than a life thing, and each president appoints 2 people to the court. So there is a natural, predictable cycling. It's not totally random. It's not playing craps with ultimate control over the American judicial system. That would be a very different thing. There would be a more sense of consistency and less fear that losing could doom you for a generation. But of course they don't want that. As is so often the case, they rail against corruption, but don't want to do anything to actually fix the system. So I think Elie Mystal is 100% right there. I do think they are clinging to power. They are hoping that Donald Trump will be able to save them. And I will just remind everyone, as I always do, for like the solid 6 months leading up to an election, the Supreme Court is a super important consideration when it comes to who wins the presidency. We shouldn't need to be reminded of that. The last couple of times that we reminded people of that, one of the reasons we would give is, hey, if they take over and if they put a bunch of right-wing radicals on the court, something crazy could happen. Like, I don't know, they could kill Roe v. Wade. Well, now all that's in the rear view mirror. They do that stuff. They stole the court. And then they killed Roe v. Wade, and they're working on theoretically bigger stuff than even that, effectively hamstringing all the any federal regulation coming from the bureaucracy. They're working on that right now. So we need to save the court. And by the way, if Trump gets elected, I have no doubt that Clarence Thomas and Alito, within 6 months, a year, maybe for Alito he's a little bit younger, maybe he'll wait 2 or 3 years or whatever, they'll replace him. They will. If Biden gets in office, they might just try to wait it out, but let's at least make them do that. Let's at least have the chance that we could take those seats. Because if we did, I mean, look, that would be a massive, unforeseen opportunity to reshape the path of the court. Right now, you have a 6-3 effectively conservative supermajority. If you were to flip those 2 seats, you have a wildly different court that might be way more in line with what the American people actually think about many of these hot button issues that the Supreme Court has been taking up and plans to over the next few years.